Hello, hello, hello. Let's make sure you guys can hear me okay. Harold, welcome. First one in the class. Congratulations to you, sir. All right, so let me do this. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I'm actually using a virtual machine, which I love. This is Azure VM, and this is something that really helps, especially with the lab environment and working through different scenarios as far as syncing or anything that has to interact with the desktop client or the desktop itself. Having a virtual machine is really good. It's just a really great experience. So what I have here, I have a VM that's spun up through Azure that I use to, oh, there go the flicker. That's weird. Let me try this again. There we go. Yeah, so this is actually an Azure VM, and like I said, this really comes in handy when I have to do a lot of interaction with the desktop client. So one of the things that I wanted to highlight is the ability to create multiple profiles within the browser. And this is a trick that becomes very handy, especially if you are dealing with multiple logins into Office 365, or you have multiple tenants that you need to bounce between. And currently today, what we would do, we would use all of these browsers here at the bottom. We would use all of these browsers to kind of set up different sessions. And then we'll do like Edge, and then we'll do private browsing in Edge, or Chrome, and then private browsing in Chrome, and all these other components just to kind of separate the different profiles. But what you have, and you have this both in Chrome and in Edge, you have these profiles that you can set up. And we're used to, especially with Chrome, you're used to seeing your profile picture based on your Gmail account in the sense of the Google ecosystem and logging in. But besides that, you can actually click on this profile, and let me just call this is my Tesla tenant. And I'm gonna just log in with, let's just say I want to create one for Ethan. And then here it allows me to pick a picture, which is just like a color for that. And now I can click done. And I just want to make sure I already have one for Ethan. Let me change this over to, let me say I have one for, okay, so let me create this for Ashley. So I'm gonna just change this over. I already have a profile for Ethan. So if I switch this over to Ashley, now what I can do, this gives me a wonderful browser session to where now I can go to office.com using this browser within this profile and have a whole new set of cookies and local storage and session state and everything that's separate from all these other profiles. And that's the key benefit. So each one of these profiles are going to have their own session, cookie storage, and really browser session independently, separate from opening up a current session and having a different tab or a different window within that session. These are totally separate, almost like a virtual environment, which is pretty cool. So now if I do sign in and then log in as Ashley, so for this o365.how, which is going to be my Tesla tenant, and then I put in the password, and now you can see that I can have my save here, so I can save these credentials for this profile. I can go through this process. Oh, it's asking me to set that up. That's fine. Yep. So now I can, once you kind of get through that verification, that, backup contact information. So once you get past that, now I have this different profile. You see her picture there, Ashley's picture. And here's another thing I love to do. I love to create bookmarks for this particular profile. So especially if I'm building like a Power Automate and I'm interacting with Outlook often, and I may be interacting with SharePoint or SharePoint lists, I may be interacting with Teams. So I have all these different interactions, and what I love to do is just go ahead and bookmark these so that way they're right there at my fingertips when I need to log in. Now, especially with this Tesla one, I also have one for the administrator. So this Clardo one is going to be my admin. And when I switch over to this, you would notice that I have like the SharePoint admin. I can also bookmark my Teams admin. Again, just allow me to toggle between these different personas in a very quick and elegant way and get to the action as quick as possible and not have to deal with what you kind of see me doing now, just like this click, click, click to get to the admin. So as soon as I bring up this Teams admin, I'm gonna go ahead and bookmark this so that way it's readily available. So there's the bookmark for that. So, and I love to kind of like put a little bit more clarity in that bookmark. So, but here, I mean, at the end, that's it. So I can toggle here's my Ethan tenant. I'm sorry, my Ethan persona that I can toggle with, and I already have like the intranet bookmark. I have Ethan's email box bookmark. And, you know, if I'm testing out, as I said before, like some of these Power Automates can get very complex in the sense that you may have a conditional approval where, you know, based on the approval selected for a user, you may or may not get a notification, right? So they may fill out a Power App form, select a certain category, and based on that category, that's where the approval request would go. And you kind of want to test those different conditions. And here I have all these personas I can use to do that test. So a really, really cool capability that you can pull off. So again, that's going to be browser profiles. And again, right here under Chrome, you will see this. This is what we're all kind of used to. But then underneath that, you will see other profiles. Just go ahead and click on the add button and then go through that process to set up a profile. Really, really cool scenario. And also, so this is what I do. So just a tip from my experience with using this, you want to come up with a good naming convention. So you would notice that everything that starts with Tesla, that's going to be for that tenant. And then I have one for SP Classroom, that's going to be for that tenant. So now I can bounce between the various tenants, and I'm keep getting that extension because I installed the Power Automate desktop extension to try to do some RPA. And for each one of these profiles, it treats them differently, almost like a different installation of Chrome. And that's what that prompt is. But, you know, as I mentioned before, this is me bouncing between a totally different tenant with different credentials, a different Azure AD, so my login and all the other stuff is going to be different, and just a super easy way to bounce between that. And even within that separate tenant, I have the different test users that I use. So what I want to do, I just want to do a quick sound check. Can you all hear me okay? Just leave a note in the chat if you can hear me okay. I don't want to get too far into this session to realize that we're having technical issues. So if you can hear me, if you can just say, yes, I can hear you, that would be great. A little feedback on my side. Okay, so that's going to be the profile piece. So that way you can bounce between it. The other thing I want to show is a new feature that's starting to pop up. Oh, awesome. Thanks, Christopher. Thanks, Harold. A new feature that's starting to pop up. And for this, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my Tesla tenant. So if I go over to Clardo Tesla, here's a new feature in modern SharePoint that you all should be getting prepared for. And this is a common ask. We have to jump through several hoops to make this happen. And now what Microsoft has done, they made this feature out of the box. And this is going to be the scenario where you can start off with different site templates. So if you go to your gear icon, you may or may not see this. Again, I'm set up in this demo environment to see a lot of the new features. I'm zooming here a little bit so that way you can all kind of see in the screen share, but see a lot of these new features when they are in public preview before they go GA. So this apply site template is one that's coming down the pike. And this is very interesting. And if you look at these templates, you would notice that they look very similar to what we're used to in the lookbook. So now if I go into details, I can see all the information about this template, and then I have this button to use to actually apply this template. Now, I'm not going to apply this template not to this site because I actually want to save this look. But let's go through and create a brand new one together. And let's just see. And I actually haven't done this yet. I just noticed that. I was like, oh, maybe I should mention that on the QA session. But I just noticed it. So here, I'm in my SharePoint admin, create a communication site. So let's just do testcom. And I'm okay with all the default settings here. Oh yeah, add myself as a site owner. And then go ahead and click finish. So now what we want to do, we want to navigate to this site and then just see exactly what we get with that. See exactly what we get with that site, apply site template. So let me go here to my created date, hit newer. Let me pause here real quick. Did you all realize, especially for the SharePoint administrators on the call, did you realize that you can actually save and carve up these site collections into various views, very similar to what you're used to in SharePoint lists? So here you would notice that I have one, you get out of the box views, what they call the built-in views. And these are very nifty, right? Especially like least active sites or my largest sites if there's a storage concern, and so on and so forth. But then you have these custom views to where I can slice and dice this, very similar to SharePoint lists, and say, okay, show me all my recent site collections. And this is just this list sorted by the created date, and that's going to be my recent. So you can actually customize these, and the default view. So maybe I do want to set this recent view as the default, so that way every time I create a site collection, it's here at the top, and we don't have to go searching for it. But yeah, take advantage of that. It's pretty cool. All right, so here we have a out of the box communication site. Now let's go through this gear icon, hit apply site template, and let me see. Let's use the Learning Central. So if I go to look at the details and then hit use template, and I'm kind of used. Wow, that was fast. Man, that was fast. Oh, that's disappointing too. Wait a minute. That's not cool, right? Apply site template. This is what I was expecting. Let's look at this again. Okay, so we get the color, which is fine, but we don't get any of the sample content. And that's what you're looking for, right? I don't care about the color and the navigation. I need the content. So this just applied the look and feel on top of the out-of-the-box content. And I guess that makes sense in some scenarios, right? I mean, because if you have a scenario where, again, that's why I did not want to apply it to that other site, because I already have it built out. I didn't want you to override that. But if I'm having a brand new site, you're teasing me with this apply site template, and my expectation was I was going to get all of this sample content with the web parts, so on and so forth. But that's not the case. Okay. So that's a miss, but it's something. I'm not sure the true value add without the content. I wish they will at least give me an option to include content or not. Almost like what we used to do when we're saving SharePoint lists and you have the option to include the data or not. So that wasn't the case, and that's unfortunate. But here you can notice that you have another option to apply your own. So from your organization, so from a site owner, they will have the ability to apply those. I'm going to dig deeper and to see if that's the true expectation of this. I mean, of course, there are some mechanics behind it, right? So I can see where this is beneficial, especially if you have listen libraries and you have all these views defined. You have your site columns, your custom columns defined. You may have a navigation set up. You may have a page structure set up. But I don't see any of that. Let's go behind the scenes. Let's look at site contents. Let's just make sure. No, this looks all default. That's a miss. That's a miss. The good news is we still have our old tools, right? The PNP provisioning power script, that PowerShell script that you can use that would do just that, right? So you can, I don't know if I have any on this template. Let me see if I have any on this tenant, where I actually downloaded a few of those site collections from the lookbook and brought them into this tenant, and I prefixed them with master. And yeah, so you see these are the ones. And here's another thing. You notice how I can easily locate these site collections because I came up with a naming convention. This is another key piece when you're looking at your SharePoint admin and your governance, especially if you're doing a request service model versus a self-service model. In the request service model, everything is a help desk ticket or some type of ticket that says, I need this site collection. These are my owners. Here's the site type. For you who are following my video series, you've seen that we built that Power App piece. I'm actually in the middle of that series now. A lot of you are waiting for me to do the climax of that series. But because this is a request service model, I have full control over the naming convention for my URLs in the site. I don't care what the site name is, but I do care what the site URL is, because now if I wanted to see which one of these site collections are my masters, where no one should be using this, and this is going to be locked down, I can easily find these master templates, site templates within my tenant. Again, this is going to get unwilling over time because right now I think they're supporting up to 2 million site collections. So if you don't have a good naming convention, you wouldn't, I mean, it's a needle in a haystack. Give yourself 3, 4, 5 years down the road of trying to find the right template. Anyway, I digress. So here we are. I have this master site template, and this came from the lookbook, right? This is one of those scenarios where you can go to the lookbook. You can say, okay, I want to import this template, content and everything, web parts and everything, into my tenant, and I just save that off as a master. And of course, you can come in and customize these and create these as to your needs. So you can create, in theory, a master department site template, or a master news portal template, or a master project site template, and so on and so forth. So all those common needs we have in our organization, you can now create site templates just for those. And then when those requests come down, you use your PowerShell PnP PowerShell script to say, here's my source. Now for this new site I created, apply everything. And you define what you apply, right? So you define, I want to apply all the pages. I want to apply all the lists and the libraries behind the scenes. When you bring those lists and libraries over, if you have custom views defined or different site columns defined, all of that comes with it, and you're ready to rock and roll. A very, very powerful tool. And I'm pretty upset that this apply site template is not that. And maybe, again, this is public preview, so maybe they're going to add in the secret option, the weapon. Yeah, see, look at this note right here. Existing pages, libraries can still be accessed in site contents. Yeah, I feel like I'm missing something. I'm sure there's a switch that's missing, or there's a feature that's missing. I cannot imagine that this is the value add of showing me this, and I use apply template, and all I get is the theme and the navigation. I just cannot imagine that's the case. Maybe they created the page. You know what? Now you have me thinking, talking this through. Maybe they created the page, but it's hidden, right? Maybe it's just not the default page. All right, so let's do this. Let's go back to test crisis, right? So this is my default page. Let me look under. Now, I didn't do this. So here I am bashing the team, and I'm not doing my due diligence. So here, let me go. Nope, this doesn't look good, guys. Look, I only have a page count of 1. At least, I don't know. Again, I'm not going to harp on that. I'm going to digress a little bit. Okay, so here we have. I did receive one question this week, and we've been gone for 2 weeks, and thank you all for joining today, and happy weekend to all of you. So over the past 2 weeks, I actually have several questions. I know I don't have a lot of time. And by the way, if you have questions because you're here live and direct, I want to definitely give you front and center attention. So if there's anything on your mind, go ahead and drop it in the chat. I also have a link. So if you want to join me here on the stage and share your screen and have a real time dialogue with me, I can do that as well. Just say, send link or something like that, and I'll drop it in the chat, and I can bring you on the stage, and we can have a real conversation about your situation. So any questions, go ahead and post them in. But in the meantime, I'll just keep chipping away at the questions that I found throughout the past 2 weeks. So here's one. Someone posted, and I think this was Mark. Someone posted and said, okay, how can we leverage Logic Apps and Azure Storage to maximize our licensing use? And this is a very good question. And I may be reading this out of context, and that's the problem that I'm running into with this, fill this form out to, post a question, because some of these require, a few back and forth dialogue. But I think what I'm hearing, let me just fire up the whiteboard here. I think what I'm hearing is this. What I'm hearing is, and for all of us who are not that familiar with Logic Apps is an Azure service, and it's going to simulate Power Automate. It's going to simulate Power Automate. Actually, I think Power Automate is built on top of Logic Apps. So it's going to be that workflow condition orchestrator type service to where it's still a UI. You can click and put things in order. But it's more robust than Power Automate. So there may be a connector, and they still have the connector strategy or connector pattern, but there may be better connectors, as in, okay, I can use this connector to consume a REST API, or maybe I use this connector in addition to a gateway to consume information on-prem. So when you look at this is how I look at most of these tools, right? And hopefully this would kind of shed a light and maybe pop an idea. So here we have, let's just call this one Logic App. So we just call this is our Logic App, right? And the question came up asking for Azure Storage. Now with Azure Storage, you actually have a couple things going on here in Azure as far as storage. So you have Azure Storage as in a blob, and you can really kind of use this as a file system. Anything you can drop here, it will consume. It doesn't organize this way like a file share or a file system, but really like a blob to say, almost like a blob. I think it's closer to similarity to the blob storage in SQL. It just says, give me whatever, store it here, and here's the key that whenever you need this thing, this is how you retrieve it. And then once you retrieve it, you hydrate and say, oh, this is a PDF, or oh, this is an MP4, or oh, this is a whatever. But in its common state, its common denominator, it's just going to be a blob, right? So that's going to be blob storage. Another storage option you have in Azure is the Azure, is it called Table? Yeah, I think it's called Azure Table. And this is going to be more structured. And both of these are extremely fast. Like the read-write time on these are just like, if they're probably faster than a millisecond. Like it's incredibly fast, like almost memory cache fast. That's how fast these are. Okay, and that speaks to the backend system on how Azure or Microsoft is leveraging these. So these may not use disk. These actually may use memory themselves to do read and write. And of course, there's different classifications of storage that you can buy. And based on your classification, your price goes up, right? So you have the blob storage, which would probably be ideal for files and other unstructured data. And then you have your blob table to where you can define columns and things along those lines. And then that way it's more predictable. So if you define very similar to a list schema that says, okay, I have column A, I have a title column, I have a description column, I have a date column, and then I have, a multi-line text column. You can define that and dump data there and then retrieve it with the expectation that they'll come back as a collection and records, and then those columns that you define will be available to you. So the question is, how can you leverage this model? And here's the dialogue that I'm missing. In comparison to what, right? Is this in comparison to the Power Platform, or is this in comparison to custom dev, or is this in comparison to X, right? So that's that two-way that we're missing. I'm gonna assume that this is in comparison to the Power Platform. So my recommendation is, if you wanted to maximize, these are two different beasts, but there is some overlap. So two different beasts in the sense that this is going to be my Power Automate, and this is going to be my SharePoint list, right? Or this is going to be my SharePoint library, right? And my library is going to represent Blob, and my SharePoint list is going to represent my Azure table, right? So here I still have the best of both worlds. And I would say these are different in the sense that this is going to be more of a no code, low code, pro code. So let's just write that down. So let's just say this is going to be low code. So actually no, so let's just up in the progression. So this is going to be no code, low code, pro code, whereas this guy is pro code only. Right? Now, with pro code means like your developer skill set, right? So even if you're a junior developer, mid-level developer, senior, or architect, or whatever the case may be, an architect does not necessarily mean that you're a senior developer. Unfortunately, there are architects out there who just don't code anymore, and so you have a senior dev that can probably code an architect in a circle, no problem. So maybe it's not architect, right? But the benefit of this scenario here is what we always look for as a developer, even if you're a junior, senior, or whatever the case may be, wherever your skill set. But understand, this is pro dev, and this is power user. Okay, I'm a junior. I'm not a developer, but I understand code, or I'm not a developer and I used to code. Or I am a pro dev and I just want to, I use these tools because they're quicker, faster, and I get a lot of free stuff, right? So I can be from dev concept to production in little to no time. So really that's the difference between them. Now, but if you circle back to the core of the question, is how can you leverage this tool set to maximize your licensing? And I want to address it here because I think from my experience, you definitely want to max out this scenario here and only use this scenario here when the requirement forces you there. And there are some gaps, right? Let's take our site provisioning process, for example. And with the site provisioning process, I'm actually able to gather the information. If I look at this as Power Apps, gather the information using Power Automate, right? So I'm able to gather everything I need to gather, process that information to the approvals, right? And then from there, I jump from Power Apps to Power Automate. And sorry, I think I screwed that up. So here's my conditional logic, and I have my approval process, my email notifications, and ... So once I do that, and then once the approval is done, my engineer is going to receive it and then actually process that request. And this is where we left off in this series. So when the engineer picks it up, we actually have the engineer manually executing this, not manually creating a site. We would never do that. That's silly talk. But manually executing the PowerShell script, that PNP PowerShell script that takes the master site and then apply it for the newly created site based on the site type that the requester asks for. So they may ask for a project site, a department site, and here's another thing. And I'm sorry about all these site steps, but here's another thing we don't do in this Power Apps. Sorry. We do not ask for, do you want a team site? Do you want a SharePoint communication site? Do you want a SharePoint team site? Which is super confusing with MS Teams. And the reason why we don't do that is because 9 times out of 10, either the requester doesn't know enough about the difference between them to make a logical decision. Two, thus the tech that we have today. We always see, we already have the Viva connection, right? With the portals coming out. Microsoft can introduce another portal type at any given time. So keep this business oriented. And when we have them select the site type, we only ask for, is it a project site? Is it a project site for internal use? Is it a project site for external use? Is it a department site? Or do you need a news portal? ... Right? Really business-centric type questions, right? So once they select that, I have my engineer, based on the site type, executing that PowerShell script based on the master site collection that was requested, the master site collection type. Now, this is where Procode come in. Procode is going to come in when I no longer force my engineer to do that painstaking task. It's very simple. You click the button, right? Maybe there's a couple parameters. You click the button, execute the PowerShell, and then be done with it. But nonetheless, it's not fully automated. It's semi-automated. So once we go fully automated, we're gonna then have to embark on something similar to this, to where I have my you get the final approval, but instead of an engineer or a human interacting with that, I'm gonna then send a request over to an Azure function, which would then execute the PowerShell script based on the information that was received in that Power App. And that's where this Procode stack come into play, right? Now, when you talk about licensing, here's something that I'm starting to see over and over again. This is a reoccurring theme. What Microsoft is doing, because even as we know, in the Power Platform, when you create these, you have your standard connectors that are going to be part of your E3 license or E5 license or business premium or whatever license you have. You're going to have a set of connectors that are going to be part of that subscription. But then you have your premium connectors, right? And your premium connectors are the ones that where Microsoft had engineers do a lot of this heavy lifting for you, and they keep you in that low code, no code realm and try to protect you from going to the pro code stage of this process. Now, the pro code stage of the process, this is where you're either going to pay dollars or you're going to have skilled people, right, within your team. Because if I have a skilled engineer, then most of the time, I may not need a premium connector, right? Most of the time, whatever I'm getting from this premium connector, I'm going to either build in Logic apps and using storage or our Azure Functions and using the blob storage or the Azure table storage or whatever the case may be, and using my pro code skills, C#, even PowerShell. That's one of the samples that we're working on. We're working on when you go to automate this this site provisioning piece. We actually have an Azure function executing a PowerShell script, which is pretty nice. And the PowerShell script you can actually apply in the UI, manipulate in the UI. It's not one of those scenarios where you're developing it in Visual Code and then you're publishing it up. You actually open up the Azure function in the browser, executing your PowerShell script and writing your PowerShell script, taking in your parameters and doing all your logic right there in the PowerShell script, but it's ran in the context of an Azure function. And the reason why you run it in the context of the Azure function so is that you can do unattended automation. Unattended automation is what we're used to with batch jobs, timer jobs for those who are old school SharePoint devs, or console jobs, whatever the case may be. But you have to prime your authentication, your authorization, and your there's no more username and passwords. Usually come in the form of a client secret and either a certificate thumbprint or a certificate file, right? That's going to be your authentication. Because we have MFA, we have all these other security parameters that we have to take into account. when you do unattended, it requires a certain security pattern to make that happen. The Azure function is going to be the key piece to one, it's going to run in the cloud, and two, it's going to give you an unattended security pattern that you can execute against. And then three, it would then just execute whatever your PowerShell script is inside of that, right? Again, taking that human out of the equation, and this from end to end is completely automated, right? So that's where the pro code really comes in. And when it comes to licensing, if your skill level, so here's another thing. So this is what Microsoft is starting to do, and I'm seeing the licensing model to support this theory. My theory is, if you're higher in skill, here's your dev skill, right? So imagine this is senior dev, and imagine this is junior dev, and imagine this is power user, right? So here I'm a power user, junior, whatever, right? The higher you are in skill, the less you have to pay in licensing, right? The lower you are in skill, the more you're going to pay in licensing, right? So if you, and I think your skill, it has a direct reflection on how much you're going to cost, how much your solutions are going to cost, and how fast your organization is able to move. Because when you're low in skill and you have licensing and high licensing costs, you're really dependent on, and we've seen this, right? You're really dependent on the capabilities of those connectors or the capabilities of those third-party solutions. But if you're high in skill, if there's a gap, you can just jump off into an Azure function or Logic apps or some type of scripting to fill that gap, right? So higher skill, they do what they want to do. Lower skill can only do what they can do and what their budget allows them to do, right? So that's one of the things to keep in mind. And this whole Microsoft 365 is especially from a licensing cost model, is starting to center around that theory or that concept. Can we bind a people picker control from a configuration list in Power App? Oh, very good question. Santha. Is it Santha? Santha. All right, thanks for that. So the question is, can we bind a, this is going to be very interesting. Okay, so let's switch over to Power Apps, because this is a Power Apps question. So I'm going to just switch this over, and I think I have a Power App up and running. Let me see what type of Power Apps do I have running these days so I can jump in and take a look at this. So the question is, we have a Power App, but I don't want my user to choose from everyone in the organization, which is the default behavior, right? So the default behavior, Power App idea, I think I can use this. Let's see. Let me launch this and see where we are with this. Oh, this is perfect. This is prime. It's not a lot there, so this is a great candidate to jump in. So the question is, you're filling out a form, you give them a people picker and say, okay, select your manager as an example. But you want to lock that in, right? You don't want them to select any manager within the organization. You probably want them to select a handful. And usually the requirement is, I only want you to select a certain number of people or a certain group of people from this list, and you want to control that, right? So if I look at this, let's look at my ideals received list. Let me go and edit this. And as you just saw, that's a quick way to jump to your list, because sometimes especially when you forget about these Power Apps, you kind of lose track of which list and where the list is stored and all this other stuff. What you just saw me do, go to the data source, click edit, it drops you right into the list for that data source. So here I have ideal received, and let's button this up with a category field. So let's do I have one already? Description, technology, is this a category field? Let me see what type of field this is. This is a single line text. Okay, let's up this to a choice field. And then here I want to pick Power Apps So these are the different technologies. So someone may have an idea about a solution, and they may say, okay, this solution is going to be within this technology stack, right? So modern SharePoint. Okay, so here we go. Wow, I feel like I've done this already. So, okay, so now I go to technology team. I did do this already. And then based on the technology team, so based on that technology selected, this is the team, or these are only the people I want them to select from, right? So now I want to do is if I go into Power App, and if I do add data, I want to bring in that technology team list. So let me search on SharePoint, because that's my connector type. And then I just use my creds here. And then let me select my technology, PA ideas here. And let me select my technology team and hit connect. All right. So once I do that, now I can, let me refresh ideas received, right? Because I changed that technology drop down or technology column from a single line text to a choice. So once I have that all set up, it's starting to yell at me because I changed this model, and it says, DeShon, where are you doing? So now let me click on this technology. Let's go ahead and remove this and re-add it in. That's probably the best way to repair this situation where I changed the column type. So now if I select technology again, this is still going to be single line text, isn't it? Yep. And this is, I think, if I remember correctly, this is where we kind of ran into an issue because changing this over was hard for it to recognize in Power App Studio. So let me try a refresh and see if we can get this thing to come back. So let me close this out. Let me go back into edit here. And usually that's what you have to do at time to time. You have to just kind of do a refresh, especially if you have to refresh your Power App Studio. Just be sure or certain that you saved everything, because it, as you saw, it will reset you back to the very beginning. Okay, so now if I go to this Power App form, click edit, and let's see if technology, there we go. So it finally recognized that it's a choice column now, and it's going to bring it in my choice. I can get rid of this. This is no longer valid. So let me go ahead and delete this guy. Okay, so now if I hold on my Alt key, hit the drop down, those are my drop down options. Okay, so now what I want to do, let's go back to our list and let's just put in, so ideas received, let's just put in the approver, right? So let's just add a column. Let's just call it approver. And this is going to be a person column because I'm selecting someone from an Active Directory. And then hit save here. Okay, so now if I go back to Power App Studio, a simple refresh to the data source should allow that guy to come in. So once I do that, go back to my component tree, hit my form component, and now bring in the approver. Okay, so once I do that, I can go ahead and do add, and now we're ready to rock and roll. Now, here's the issue that we run into. If I fill this out, say, oh, I have an idea about this, and this is going to be about modern SharePoint, I can search anyone within Active Directory for this. And you can see here, I probably have a ton of Kevins, and then a ton of Marys, and whatever common name that you may have, right? And I don't want you, especially for large organizations, I don't want you to choose, even small, right? Maybe I want to direct this to a handful of people. So I don't want this to search my entire Azure AD. I want to limit that. So the way that you do that is that, let me bring in that technology team again, because that list, I didn't save it, so whatever we did before a refresh was lost. So I go and grab this guy, technology team, hit connect. So now I can bring this in, and I can, what I want to do is control the approver items here, right? And you will notice that this has this arbitrary choice column, but I want this to be filtered on the technology. And I want this choice column, this choice option to come from my data source. So let me unlock this because I can't do anything with this component until I unlock it. So now I want this choice to come from my data source. So what I can do, I can erase this and now just bring in my entire data source, which is called what? Team technology, right? Or technology team. So I start typing in technology team. That's my entire data source. And now it's asking me which column do I want to select choices from. So I don't recall how the schema was set up. So let's click on this. And the column is going to be my team column. This is where I have, and this is a multi-select, right? This is a person column. So if I do edit here, yeah, so this is a person group type, and it's set up for multi-select. So I can expect this column to have many people in there. So now if I go to my choice option, I do a .team, and that should give me my choices. Let me see. How can let me see if I can, because sometimes this drop down works, sometimes it does not. So this is going to give me my choices, and I should only be able to pull from, let's say Kevin's in there, DeShon's in there, Ashley, and Madison. So Ethan is not here. So let's see if I can search on Ethan. So if I come here and I search on Ethan, oh, Ethan popped up. Interesting. And what about Kevin? This thing is still searching everything. All right. So let's see. We look like we have a little bit more work to do. So this is my items. And my items should only be technology team. All right. So let's do this. Let's take choices off. Oops. Let's take choices off. It seems like we can't mimic what was there before. This is a weird syntax, and it's doing something behind the scenes. I'm not 100% on what it's doing. So here, if I do, here's my different collections, right? So I got the column, and it's bringing out all my different collections. But what I want to do, I don't want every row in this technology list, right? I don't want it to consider all of these people, only the one that was selected based on the technology type. So let's just hard code Power Apps as an example, and I'm only expecting these 3. So if I go here, right, so I say, okay, let's do a lookup. And then that's going to be technology, and I'm looking where, is it title? Oh, I forgot. I didn't get the name. Yeah, so where title equals Power Apps. So here I can just do title, looking for some IntelliSense help here. There we go. So title equals Power Apps. And again, I'm going to hard code this for now, and then we can walk through how to make it dynamic. Okay, so once I have that, this is going to be my list here. So now if I hold down my key, this is where they're restricted to pull from, right? And I think that's going to work out just fine. So it seems like you have to remove that choice option when you need to do that. Okay, so now you have that. Now you want to say, I want to limit this based on the selection that they have here. And here I have the technology. Why is this coming up as full name? Isn't that weird? Oh, there's a hidden field behind there. Never mind. I see what's happening. All right, so here I got my technology, and because I'm going to use this in the formula, I'm going to rename this. So let's just call this VTech for technology. And now when I do my filter, I can say where instead of hard-coded Power Apps, let's just do VTech dot selected dot value. And that should give me that string value selected. So now if I play this in preview, if I do modern SharePoint, that's my user. If I do Power Apps, those are my users. And if I do modern SharePoint, that's going to be my user, right? So, our Power Automate, I think, yeah. So those are my. So this is working as expected, and this is how you can limit that, right? So to where they can only select from a handful of users, and you control that using that lookup list. So hopefully that helps. So how can you bind people from multiple rows in the configuration list? Ooh, okay, that's tricky. I would probably, if you can, I would love to solve for that though. If you can, I would recommend doing a multi-line, right? Especially if these are the people for the same department or same category or same whatever. I would just do it this way. But if you had the same, let's see if we can do that. So if you had the same, so let's just call this Power Apps. And let's just call this, let's bring Ashley into this. So Ashley is another approver for Power Apps. And let's just do another Power Apps. And we can bring in, let's just say, let's bring in row. Okay, is Andre in there? No, Andre's not in there for Power Apps. Oh, Ashley's already in there for Power Apps. I don't want Ashley in there twice. Let me pick someone else. Running out of names here. Let me see. Madison. Is Madison? Madison's on there already. Christian. There we go. All right, so now we have some unique users. Now this is going to be interesting. Now my scenario may be complex because I'm doing a multi-row. Because first off, I'm still filtering on Power Apps, but instead of using a lookup, I need to do a filter because I'm expecting more than one record, right? But now that I have that, I'm gonna have to concatenate this collection with this collection with this collection. And even though they have single item, I have to treat them as a collection because of my site column configuration, right? Tricky, but doable. All right, so let's see here. So now what I want to do, let's just change this to a filter because I'm expecting more than one, right? And let's refresh our data source so our IntelliSense can show us the new records that we just added, right? So now if I mouse over here, I still only get one team. Oh, I made a, let's see, we have to select Power Apps. There we go. So now I should see some nastiness. So this is going to be a collection of a collection, right? So here I have all my rows, and for each one of these tables, I have other users. Now, this is where, how can you do this? This actually may require some researching. I think I know what so this is where, and it took me a while to really appreciate this method. It's called the for all. Now with the for all, this is going to be your, this is like your for each, right? And as you can see that the parameters look very similar, simple, but you can do some very complex things here. So here what I can do, I need to do this filter first. Let me do this because I love to separate this. So let me just do all, let's see, approvers, right? And then I'm gonna set this to that. Just to kind of break it up. And this is just me being DeShon. So no, I need to do a clear collect. I need to collect. Uh-oh. what I'm trying to do is, what in the world? Where's my clear collect? Are we not doing collects anymore? Oh, I see. No, I need an action. I see. I see. So what's happening here? IntelliSense is not helping me because this property here is just it's a non-user action property, and they have different properties classified as such. A non-user action property means that this, like that filter and lookup, all of that's going to happen based on something changing, and it detects that. It's almost like an AJAX call to where it detects there's a change to the thing that is filtering on. And this takes a lot, like this whole piece here, because we don't have to detect when this changes, and it does this automatically, saves us a ton of code. But because we're using like a collect or building a collection of things, we're going to have to put all of this inside of an action, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to leave this here for now. And the action is going to be when this drop down changes, right? So on change here, and this is a user action. So when they change this, now I want to do all my fancy stuff. And I should get a collect here now, right? You going to help me out? There we go. So I'm going to do a clear collect here. And I'm going to name this, I'm going to call this all approvers. And then I'm going to set this to that filter. And the goal here is to do all this heavy lifting. Again, I have to do a collection of a collection and then store that into a local variable or a local collection and then set my approver dropdown equal to that local collection. So here I'm going to do a clear collect. Clear collect means that every time there's a change, clear this collection out and then reload it with this information. So I'm going to clear that out. I don't know why it's spitting this up. Do I not have the right number of parentheses? Let's start there. You had one too many. All right, so here, now that I have that, let's get rid of this line. Now I want to say, okay, for everybody that I dumped in this collection, that row of collections or row of tables, it's going to loop through each one of those, and then it's going to say, okay, what do you want to do? So now I need to take the team property from each row and set it to another variable. So let me do a collect. This I'm hoping this works. Collect call approvers to the team column. And this actually may work. The key is understanding this secret sauce here. This may be overkill, right? If this works, this may be overkill because I can obviously replace this piece with whatever I'm setting that collection to. And now I'm looking at each item. That's what this comma says. It said, okay, I'm gonna loop through all the items here. And this is not going to show me what that's going to look like, is it? No. So anyway, it said I'm gonna loop through all of these items here that's returning your filter, and then I'm gonna take out the team column, and then that collection I'm gonna just append it to this guy here. Hopefully this works. And I can't really see it, which is aggravating, but let's see. Let's trigger this. Let's trigger this. All right, so now what we have to do is set this equal to the thing that we were trying to collect. And that's going to be approvers here. And can I see this? We didn't find any data. Look like it's doing something. No. Let me see this in preview. And this is where you kind of like coding in the black box, because you can't really tell what's being gathered and what's not. I don't think that's it. I don't think that's it. We're missing something. We're close. We're missing something. I'm gonna actually probably have to get back with you on that one. But in short, this is the concept. The concept is to grab all of them, drop them here, and then for each one of them, you have to do something here. And whatever I'm doing here, I'm not doing correctly, right? Whatever I'm doing here, I'm not doing correctly. I wonder if I should just bring in everything and then try to pull that out. No, I'll find out. I'll find out. Let me play around with it. This is a really good scenario, and it's good to understand that. And I probably can simplify this, right? If I go back to my list instead of making it, especially if I'm gonna go with this model that says I'm gonna just do these individual row. I probably want to change this to single, not to support multi-value, right? To take away from that collection of the collection. And if that's the case, then it just becomes filtering this, expecting one item here, and then just adding it to the collection and then displaying that as your drop down. So what is the best practice for redesigning info path to Power Apps? So redesigning info path to Power Apps. Well, I would say the best thing to consider when you have to redesign info path to Power Apps is the difference in the two technologies, right? So I would say, if I bring up the whiteboard again here, it's going to be the difference between the two technologies, and not necessarily the differences, but the thought process on how to approach it, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean that the two are, though they on the surface, they seem like they solve the same problem, they're two different animals. InfoPath is going to be what I would call a prescriptive technology, meaning that it's really good at these columns coming from SharePoint. Based on the definition of those columns, it knows which control to grab, and you pretty much have to play within that. And usually if you have to do some of the most simple things, you have to create like these rules. And heaven forbids, you have to jump into JavaScript and create some of these functions for some of those rules. And Nintex Forms is the same way. And you have buttons that are very simplistic, meaning that they're prescribed to either submit the form, cancel the form, or you can wire up some type of scripting to clear out all the items on the form. Very, very prescriptive. Very heavy and bound to, and actually only bound to SharePoint. So these forms are really driven by SharePoint. What you have in SharePoint and how you define your columns defines your flows. And of course, you can do different page views and all the other things that we have to jump through to kind of simulate a like a multi-form or a multi-wizard list. When it comes to Power Apps is going to be a bunch of Lego blocks, right? And there are some key definition or key components within Power Apps. So just imagine if you had to rebuild the same form that I have over here. First off, your container is going to be a Lego block, and this is going to be a form. And above the form, you're going to have these things called screens, right? And with your screens, you can have one or many screens, and within the screen, you can have one or many components. This form is just one of many components that you have at your disposal. Whereas in InfoPath, you start off with a form and there's no concept of a screen. So really you have a layer on top of the layer that you used to plan in. Now, once you do that, everything that you build, say this is your, if you decide to use a form component, in your form component, you're going to have other subcomponents. Now, one of the things that Power Apps does for you is that it also decouples your data source. Here, your data source is only SharePoint in the InfoPath world, right? So you're only dealing with SharePoint, and there's no other consideration. Where on Power Apps, your data source is a connector, right? There's going to be a data source connector, and then from that connector, you're going to have a whole library of different data sources to choose from. And this is where you're going to have like Dataverse. You can actually bring in Excel as a data source. You can obviously bring in SharePoint as a data source. So you can bring in all, and there's a whole host of third parties and all this other stuff that you can bring in. All right. So so in our scenario, we're going to center around SharePoint as our data source. And then when we do that, this form component has a special connector called properties and our interface. And these properties is where you set everything. You saw me kind of do that when we were setting up the formula. So, if I flip over to Power Apps to kind of show you this, this is the screen, which I showed you. And this is my form component, but look along all the other components that are here. And as I click on it, you see how they highlight over here on the screen itself, right? And in the screen is going to be this whole container here, and your screen defines your definition, your dimensions, and all the other stuff. The biggest feature benefit Power Apps has above all other third parties that we're used to in SharePoint, in the SharePoint world, and I say all other third parties. So even the native party or first party technology like InfoPath, third party like Nintex, third party like K2 RIP, or any other third party that jumped into the game to solve this problem. The biggest advantage Power Apps has is that for each one of these components, I have a whole slew of properties that I can set for that component. And you can say, well, DeShon, most of them already have properties. I mean, that's how we configure them. That's how we made them do what they need to do. But not only do I have properties, I have an expression library that I can use to code that property. So this max length is only looking for a number. But look at this. This is looking at the data source, which is my SharePoint site, and it's looking at a property on this particular column to get the max length. So when I go to my site column, and the default length for a single line text is 255, and we know that on the site column, you can redefine that to be 40, 50, 80, 90, any character count under 255. This will dynamically pull that in. And that's the biggest technical advantage this platform has over everything that we've seen so far in the SharePoint space, right? So not only do you have these components, you have properties, and not only do you have properties, you have an expression library to where you can define what that property, how to achieve that value that property is expecting. And these properties come in all shapes and sizes. They can be images, and where they can accept a blob or URL to an image. They can be collections, like you saw what we were playing around with the approver drop down and limiting who they can select from. They can be text values. They can be integer values, date time values, and so on and so forth. But you have like each one of these properties have their own interface of what they can and cannot accept. So then once you have that, and again, these are all Lego blocks, and that's why the learning curve is a little bit steep. And it's not because the technology is different, because I was able to teach my son Power Apps, and he just grabbed on and caught on like, oh, this is cool. This makes sense, because he didn't have to erase or change his habits, what he was conditioned to do in InfoPath, Nintex, and K2, and so on and so forth, because they were so prescriptive. If you want to display this, then you have to do X, Y, and Z in order for it to display this. If you want to display a multi-text field, then you need to do X, Y, Z as a prerequisite to display that multi-text field. Oh, when you click this button, you have 3 options. If you need to do something over the 3 options, that's when we had to jump through all those different hoops and get extremely creative to get InfoPath to do what we needed to do to solve a business requirement. Microsoft has since then looked at that model, saw how prescriptive and locked in it was, and went with more of a Lego block or more of a component model. And what this allows you to do is to take this, and here's the screen. Like, I don't necessarily have to use a form component to do this. I can bring in individual components to do this, right? So I can do, like, I can hard code, or not really say hard code, but I can wire up all of these manually if I wanted to, right? So here I got single line text, a drop down, and then a multi-text field. And then I have 2 buttons, right, on this screen. So if I switch over to Power Apps, you see how I get a lot of this information for free because I use this form component. And then if I go into Properties and click Edit and then hit Add Field, these are all my available site columns on my data source. Notice I didn't say SharePoint list, because if this was SQL, this would be all my columns on my SQL table. If this was Excel, this would be all my columns on my Excel file. Again, your data source is decoupled from your component, which gives you a lot of flexibility. So now, since this is SharePoint, these are all my columns on my SharePoint list, but I don't necessarily have to wire it up this way. So I can go here, go new screen, let's go blank, right? And start to drop in all of my components here, just raw, without the form component. And unfortunately, a lot of people started to do this, just build it out raw. And I think this is what Nintex or someone else did. But, you know, you kind of build these out raw, and then you wire them up to the forms. So, oh, okay, this site column maps to this. This text field maps to this site column. And then you can bring in your date picker. Oh, this date picker field maps to this site column. And you do all that mapping in manual work. And then when you're ready to submit it, you'll bring a button on the form, right? And then you'll wire up this button to say, okay, they have this one, like on select this click event, they have this one method called patch, right? And then in the patch it says, okay, what data source do you want? What record do you want to either if you're updating the record, you specify the record. If you're creating a new record, there's a special syntax for that. And then this is parameterized. Then you just comma separate all of your updates. And it comes in the form of a JSON object. Extremely nasty. But people have been doing that. And I think what it was is that people were learning Power Apps. Someone did a tutorial on doing it this way, and everyone started to follow that tutorial because it was like one of the first few that you can find on how to make heads or tails of this stuff. So since then, we graduated and found out that you don't have to do any of this stuff, which is extremely tedious to do and extremely harder to maintain. You just bring in your form component, right? And you just bring in a form component, and I would just say an edit form, and it says, okay, where's your data source? If you point me to your data source, I can find all your columns for you. So I do hit this connect and say, okay, my data source is going to be, this is not going to work. I don't know why, like I hit connect and it shows me this, and I think I need to click on it. Actually, the property is here. The set the property is here. So here I'm going to select ideas, right? And now it's doing its wizard thing. And this is what InfoPath would do for us, right? It's just okay, here are all your site columns, and they had that weird tree view, and you select which ones you want to show or which ones you want to hide and all this other stuff. So now that I have this, to reposition these, it's just a matter of bringing up this edit fields, dragging and dropping these into position. If I'm missing something, I just click add field, again, now that it's connected to my data source, I can select what's missing, even the ones that are out of the box, right? Modified by, or not custom columns, right? So I can even bring those in. They would bring them in as a read-only, in the read-only fashion, but just to display information, but you have that available to you. We know that as a SharePoint list item, you can have attachments. There's a special component here. If you don't need it, that's going to be represented here. Just click remove and it's gone. Now, a lot of people may say, well, that's pretty ugly, or that's, the grid system for that is pretty strict. And I want to do something fancy because, I'm working with a UI UX designer, and they have these extremely fancy things that I need to create in my form. So one, I still would do this. Usually that's the argument people make with doing it the other way, where you drop these components onto the screen individually. That's their argument. Their argument is, I need more control over the layout. The form control is just so stringent with this grid layout, whatever. Okay, so here, a couple things I want to point out that will kind of save you from shooting yourself in the foot. The first thing is you can control the column layout using the column property here, right? So you can use this to control how wide, how narrow you want, how many columns you want, so on and so forth. So you have that at your disposal, no problem. The other thing is, and you're going to run into this, sometimes your UI person may say, or UX person, I need you to break these fields up into different sections. Well, we can do that as well, because when you go into edit fields, right here under this ellipse, again, it's hidden, and that's why you're part of this video, and that's why we're connected, because I can take my experience and show you all the shortcuts. You just add these custom cards in there. Now, what is a custom card? Now, this is where I'm going to show you a couple things here. This is such an interesting question. I didn't realize we we're going to go this route. But there's an opportunity for me to show you a couple things that kind of bust the myth of why you should not use this form component. And some people don't even realize that's here. So here I want to break up this form. So I'm going to use this data card. And because I have this grid system, right? If I select this card, I have this grid system. And it's a 2-column grid, and right now it seems like each column is taking up about 613. So I just double this so that if I do that 1226, that's going to give me that entire row, which is what I want. The next thing I want to do, I want to use this like a line break, right? So I'm going to do maybe like a 20 height, and then a background color just to kind of throw a little jazz in there of like this light gray, just to kind of break it up, right? Now, once I have that, I can move these in position. So what if I wanted full name, status, email, and maybe not description, line break, then start with description, have that has the entire row, and then the line break for technology, ticket number, right? So in order to do that, I will click on this guy, click on edit, move it in position. I want this data card, which is just my section breaker, above email, no, after email, sorry. Look at that. I made a mistake and I can easily correct it. I also want description to take up, here, and here's a pro tip. Descriptions, usually multi-line text fields come in as single line text. And there's a couple ways that you can adjust this. You can manually stretch this out, which is a no-no. What I would do, I would just select edit multi-line. There's a different attribute that you can set on that data card. So for multi-line columns, I select this a multi-line. It automatically gives me the width that I need. That's going to be scrollable. Now, if I need to adjust the height, I can. But the most important thing is to set this to edit multi-line text. The next thing I want to do, I want this to stretch out and have the entire row. I do the same trick that I did with the data card. Select it so that way you're adjusting the right one. Double it. So 1226 without the period. And that's going to go ahead and stretch it out. The next thing I want is to repeat that line break above technology, again, to kind of give it more separation. So here, I think I can do this the easy way. Can I copy this? Nope, you can't copy. So I have to do this the hard way. So here, let me just go ahead and add another custom card. And do you remember those dimensions? Oh, we have them here. So the height is 20, and then we have a gray selected. And I think we used the second gray. And you hear me refer to like first gray, second gray, third gray, whatever. So here, I want to select this guy, but just by selecting it here, I do not update my property pane to reflect the one selected. So in this option here, you have select control, which simulates me finding it in this scroll bar and then selecting it. So now I can go my 1226 here, and my height of 20, and then my background. What are we doing? First gray or second gray? First gray. Okay. And then my background as a first gray, right? And now we should be able to get this out the way so we can see everything. We should be good. So now I want to move this up under, where's my separator? Right above technology. So again, you're going to feel the urge to try to grab it here and move it. And that's, it becomes tedious. You don't get the results you want. Then you will remember that you need to move it in this fashion. So let's just grab this, move it above technology, and that should be my line break. Nope, it snapped back down. Let's try it again. I'm confused. No, let's move this above. Oh, I moved the wrong thing. So description should be between these two. All right, so that's it. So now if I look at this in preview mode, I get nothing. Why is that? All right, so when you bring these forms onto the screen, there's one thing you have to do. You have your data source set, but you have to tell it which item are you manipulating. Again, all these fields just represent one list item in that SharePoint list. So here, in our scenario, we're only dealing with the first item. So let me just do first, and then I deal my data source. So defaults with the data source, this method returns a record, and what it's going to do is going to create a brand new record within that data source as soon as you click submit. So now that I have this and I hit preview, now it doesn't say it's looking for my data source, and then it finds it fine, no problem. Okay, so here, this is what this guy looks like. Scroll. I think this is way too much real estate for a form. And usually if I'm dealing with a screen of this size, I tend to collapse my form into a usable fashion. And notice how I was able to move this around without having to spend the 30, 40, 2 hours to reposition all my controls and line them up on the x-axis and line them up on the y-axis. I know I went backwards with those, but I didn't have to do all of that. I just simply repositioned my form component, and everything inside of it responded and adjusted accordingly. So usually what I would do is just drop that on there, get me a nice little image component, drag that onto the screen, and now I can put some dressing on here, dress this up a little bit, do a fill, and then go find an image off of my local desktop, which I probably don't have anything on this VM. All right, so if I had an image, it would be here somewhere. Nope, I don't have anything. This VM is freshly minted, so I don't have anything there. So here I can just grab an image and then have that there. And then, of course, you've seen what I do with this screen. This is my go-to. This is exactly what I do. I mean, I put a rectangle in there for my brand color. I put a title. I put my brand color here. I put my brand color as a border with a clear or white fill, right? That's how I separate my primary from my default button. And you're ready to rock and roll. I mean, you put these things together pretty quickly if you're using the right component. So back to, let me show you this one last thing, and then I will circle back to the original question. And hopefully this was helpful on how you transition from InfoPath to Power Apps. The other thing I wanted to show is that these are called data cards. And oh, man, I have so much to unpack here. These are called data cards. And these data cards, because you saw how we brought them in, we just brought them in as fields. But these are hyper hyper productive. That's the wrong word, but they're hyper something, right? They're hyper configurable. They're hyper config, and it came in almost like a wizard where a lot of stuff was done for us. And most of the times that's helpful until you need to customize it, and then it's hurtful because you don't know what was done for you, because if you need to manipulate something, it's not clear on how you manipulate that. Let's take 2 minutes and go through the anatomy of a data card. And this could be a 20-minute video, so I'm gonna have to shrink this down into 2 minutes. So it's gonna be extremely high level brush, but at least enough to give the concept. In this data card, you have a label which defines, and notice what highlights here on the left when I click. You have the label that defines the label, and this is usually the title of your site column. If you explore this, because you may be questioning, where is it getting that title from? Like if I needed to overwrite this, where should I overwrite it? Now, if I click on this text, which tells me the text for this label, it says, I'm getting that from your parent, and then the display property from your parent. Well, in this context, looking at this in context, the parent is going to be this data card, and that's what we call this bounding box. It's the data card or the data card container, and everything within there are components associated to that data card. And this data card is associated to, or its parent would be this form component, right? So the form component, if you look at the properties, it defines the item. It also defines what we said, the data source. So it says, oh, I'm looking at this SharePoint list, and I'm looking at this particular item, and I'm gonna feed all this information to my children. Well, for this item, this is gonna be an empty item. So anything that we add here, we're gonna create the item in that selected data source. Now going to the data card. We know that we have the data source, we have the item, but we know there's a ton of site columns on that SharePoint list item. So where does it know to wire up full name site column to this particular data card to show all this information about the full name site column? That comes from your data field property, and that's the magic piece there. It says, from this data source, which it grabbed from its parent, pull in the site column title, and that becomes your data source, and that drives everything. So now when I look at my display property, which I'm feeding down to my child, the display property is full name. And this is not clear how this became full name, right? Because I was expecting to see an expression like data field dot name or something along those lines, but it's not. So, and then you have your default value here. You got this item dot full name. That's going to be your default. And then, you know, explore. So I say all that to say there are no secrets here. Like everything that it did for you, it follows the same pattern as if you did it yourself manually. It was just an automatic process for you. Now I say all that to say this. What if we did not want to, for technology as an example, and let me give technology the entire width. So my number changed here a little bit. So if I double this, so instead of, I'm running out of time. So instead of 399, so I got to double this. So if I double that, that's going to be what? That's 400, 800, and then minus 2. So 798, right? So, okay, so I double this. What if I hit this drop down, I don't want a drop down for these options. What if I wanted a select of images to represent, so maybe there's an icon for Power Apps, an icon for Power Automate, and an icon for SharePoint. How would I do that instead of being stuck with this drop down? Now, here's the magic. Once you understand that this was put together for you automatically, and you can unlock it, that's why you have to unlock it, because you're saying, okay, thanks for putting this together for me, but I can handle it from here. So I'm going to unlock you, give myself some real estate, and if I want to, I can hide this. So let's bring in let's bring in a radio button or something like that. So here I can change this collection to be whatever I want. So here I want, instead of a drop down, I want to position this as the radio buttons. And then the radio button is going to say, okay, anytime that the radio component says, anytime I'm dropped in, I just use this sample radio sample collection. What collection do you really want me to use? And here, I don't know, but I can go to a component that's working, copy it, go down to my radio button, paste it, and now look at that. Now I have radio buttons instead of a drop down. And now what I can do, I wonder if I can show these horizontally. I don't use this often. So let me see. Can I show this horizontally? Text alignment, color, layout, mode, maybe? No. Let me see. Oh, here's layout. Layout vertical. Look at that. You ask and you shall receive. Okay, so here we go. Now I can lay this out vertical. And once I have this, I'm done. I don't need this, right? But be careful. So I'm not going to delete it. I can hide it. But understand that once you change the UI of how you want to represent those dropdowns, again, this is all Lego blocks, so you can do whatever you want. You have the power. So once you change this UI and give it a different look, be careful on how you save that information, right? So again, this is why understanding the anatomy of the data card is so important, because now when I select the technology data card, let me show you this other magic property. It's called the update property. The update property says for this column, for this component, the selected value is what I'm sending back to SharePoint to save as a value. And this is going to come in many different shapes and sizes depending on the component or the site column you're dealing with, right? And that makes sense, right? So if you're dealing with a people person, this is going to look different. If you're dealing with a number versus a date versus a single line text, maybe even multi-line text, this is just going to look different. So for each one of these, this save value is going to look different. But because look where it's looking for. It's looking at data card value 7. If I select that, that's my drop down. I dropped in here radio 1. So I needed to grab radio 1, that selected value, not data card value 7. So now what I can do is go to my update property and say, instead of data card value 7, I'm going to do radio 1. And I just assume it may have a selected property. Let's see. Right? And this is going to return a record. So now I'm good to go. I can hide this. Again, you can delete it or you can hide it. I'm just more comfortable with just hiding it just in case I need to bring it back and I don't have to rewire things up. So now I can, on my visibility button, which I can't find for some odd reason. That's weird. So for visible, I'm going to just set this to false, which is hard-coded to true, right? Because I don't need that. And now I'm going to just put this in alignment and close this up. And my data card, remember I stretched it out to get more real estate to play. Now I'm finished with all of that and I'm ready to rock and roll, right? Now notice what I did. I did not create this radio on top of the screen. I unlocked the data card and made sure that whatever I put in was within the context of the data card. This is what allows this formula, right? You see my items formula. This at choices and then this weird notation here and then this is what makes that formula works, right? And now what I can do on the data card, I can still leverage things like in making this required. So let's just say I want to make this required. And we all know, let me just pause here again. We all know that we don't set required fields on our data source. That's a big no-no. That's one of the gotchas that you run into. And the reason why you don't set required on your data source, meaning I'm not going to go to the SharePoint list and mark this column as required, because that boxes me in. And when I get to the Power Automate part of this solution, it's going to make things that much harder to work with for updating items and stuff like that. Because once you make it required, anytime you make a change to that list item, all required fields must have a value, even if you're feeding it the same value that it already had. That's just something, that's a hoop you have to jump through. So because of that, we don't set required fields on our SharePoint list item. Now, you know the full name is marked as required. That's just because that's the default title, and I never went back and unchecked that. But, that's on by default. But all of my other custom ones, I'm not setting required on that SharePoint list item. I'm going to do it right here in the Power App. So if I wanted to make email required, I just go up here to where it says required, go ahead and unlock it because it's not pulling that in from my data source and then forcing it to true, right? And I love doing that here because now I can do conditional requirements, right? So if it's something where the status is approved and I need a description, or the status is rejected and I need a description, now I can change, if I can do something on that required field that says, if the status equals this, then required is true, else required is false. So I have way more control over my form, and I'm not having something dictated to me from my data source. Awesome. All right. I'm just looking through here. Yes, Mickey, Mikey, I would take a note. Thank you for that. All right. I think that's it, guys. Another great question, a great series, great list of participation. I had a ton that I wanted to cover. I did see one about Box migrating to SharePoint Online. I will start off next weekend with that one. I also saw security and governance on Azure AD and SharePoint groups. Like, what's the difference between that and what is the best practice? It sounds like there is a scenario where an organization is getting extremely strict with their governance. So we can talk through that and talk through, some of the best practices there. There's definitely some opportunity there. All right, so I'm gonna actually let you all, you're welcome, Harold. Thank you all for joining. I'm gonna let you all go. Enjoy your weekend and enjoy yourselves. And again, any questions, please fill out the form so that way I can have them. And then it will allow me an opportunity to do some research. Oh yeah, and then the one with the multi-select, I'm actually itching to resolve that. So I'll probably jump into that one later tonight. But as soon as I have an answer, I'll go ahead and get that posted with the multi-select option for the approval process. Take care of yourself. Until we chat again, I'll see you next Saturday.